Hey there, I'm Sam Bezek of BossStrength.com, and today I'm coming at you with episode 5 of Boss Bites, a little daily video log and podcast that I like to do addressing some of the most important questions in the fitness industry. And today I'm going to be talking about the idea of whether or not you need to track calories to lose weight. Okay, this is something that's certainly come in vogue in the past couple years, this whole idea of flexible dieting and tracking your calories. And a lot of people think that they either need to track calories or that it's not necessary or that tracking calories is just too difficult. There's a lot of different stances, and I just wanted to weigh in on the whole issue. So first and foremost, you have to ask, why would you be tracking calories in the first place? Well, really it comes down to this whole idea of energy balance. And this is something that I've talked about a bunch of times in other articles and videos, this idea that in order to change your body composition and your body weight, you have to adjust your calorie intake. So for example, if you want to lose weight, you'd have to expend more calories than you're consuming. And alternatively, if you wanted to gain weight, you'd need to consume more calories than you're expending. It's pretty simple. And the whole idea of tracking calories is basically a method to be able to successfully manipulate your energy balance while still being able to eat foods that you enjoy. So the whole idea of flexible dieting really came about as in response to this, the original idea of traditional dieting, which is, and I hate to use these terms, but like the clean eating stuff. People had assumed for a long time that in order to get in great shape that you needed to specifically eat, really lean proteins, low GI carbohydrate, a lot of vegetables. And while those things are certainly beneficial, it brings into the question of whether or not that's sustainable long term and whether or not it creates good or bad habits. From my perspective, it can create bad habits. It can create good habits as well, but you're creating this environment where you're severely restricting food, especially foods that you enjoy, like pizza and ice cream, just to name a couple. And then in my mind, this potentially leads to binge relationships with food. Once you get the chance to have a cheat meal, you go off the rails. And, and I'm not saying this happens to everybody. I'm just speaking from personal experience and logic and reasoning that severely restricting yourself and then binging on occasion isn't really conducive of a healthy relationship with food. So that's really why I've moved towards tracking, in addition to the fact that energy balance is the number one theory behind how your weight actually changes. So to track calories, tracking calories just allows you to eat a wider variety of food, but do so within the confines of your energy requirements. And if you didn't actually know, this is how just about every single diet works. In effect, each diet, regardless of how you're doing it, the primary goal behind it is to help you better manage your calorie intake. Okay, so many people have success, doing a ketogenic style of dieting. People, are successful with fasting. People are successful with paleo. These different types of eating, while some of them might hold special properties that we don't fully understand yet, for the most part, these diets have the primary goal of helping you reduce calorie intake with ease. For me, fasting is super easy. It's easy for me to manage my calories. Is because I'm fasting the reason that I've been successful? Maybe, maybe not. But overall, I'd like to think that it's because it's helped me better manage my calorie intake. Okay, so to sort of get into whether or not you actually need to use calorie tracking, the simple answer is no. You definitely don't need to track your calories and or macros. Many people for years and years and years have been successfully manipulating their diet and their calorie intake without tracking calories. The problem is that it can, people don't want to track calories because they think that it's too difficult, but really, in my mind, it's a super simple way to diet only because you get to choose just about anything you want. If I want to have pizza tonight, I can do that and make sure that it fits within my calorie intake, and I can still expect that tomorrow I'll wake up in a similar position that I am now. If you're not tracking calories and depending solely on the foods that you're eating, it makes it much more difficult to understand whether or not you're actually consuming more calories than you need to, or if you're consuming the appropriate amount of calories for weight loss. That really is my only gripe with not tracking calories, because you're in essence, for the most part, just guessing unless you have a solid program down of how you can eat and still reach your goals without having to track calories. Additionally, when you're actually tracking your calories, you're much more accurate. You know exactly, for the most part. I mean, some nutritional labels aren't accurate, so to speak, but for the most part, you can hit a certain calorie goal within 15 or 20 calories, which in my mind, if you're actually serious about losing weight or getting a much better body composition, that level of precision is certainly beneficial. It's at least beneficial to me. It makes more sense to be able to say like, oh, I can have this much food and still be within my goal. That in my mind is a better opportunity than, just guessing and saying, oh, well, can I actually eat this meal? Will it actually put me over my calorie limits? Which, have I been doing that for weeks on end, and maybe that's the reason why my weight hasn't fluctuated. That's the primary reason why I prefer tracking, but you certainly don't need to track. So if you don't care to track calories, I just wanted to give a couple tips of what you can do to ensure that you're actually successful. First, and I know this kind of goes against this whole idea, but I suggest that you start tracking only for like a couple days. And I say to do that because you can choose what sort of foods you're going to eat throughout the diet, and then if you track for a couple days, you'll have a good estimate of just how many calories certain ingredients have. So, you can track your chicken and your pork and your steak, and then a bunch of different carbohydrates and vegetable sources, and you can, just understand how much caloric impact those different types of food are going to have on your energy intake. So that way you can say like, oh, I can have 3 or 5 meals that include this amount of lean protein, this amount of healthy fat, and this amount of carbohydrate. And then over time, you can eventually say like, oh, I can have 3 of these meals per day and expect to lose weight. And then once you get to the point where your weight loss has plateaued, which it will come regardless of if you're, tracking calories or not, you can say like, oh, I can just cut one of my meals in half, and now I have 2.5 meals, and that will put me in a good position for weight loss. I just suggest that you have some sort of a metric to be able to measure your progress and to be able to measure what changes you'll need to make in the future for continued weight loss. And then number 2, which is kind of the most unfortunate part of this, I also suggest that you restrict the options that you have available to you. Typically, I would never suggest something like that because I don't believe that it's very sustainable. I mean, who am I to tell you that you should never eat pizza for the rest of your life? Because I'm certainly not going to stop, but I'm able to do that without any, effect on my conscience because, I know that pizza fits within my calorie intake. So it's easy for me to manipulate, today's dietary intake and tomorrow's dietary intake to adjust according to those foods. When you're not tracking your food, it becomes much less, it becomes not as easy to consume different foods because you're not really sure how much you're consuming, and you're not really sure if that will put you over the limit. For example, like when I'm tracking calories and I want to have pizza, for example, I can say like, oh, I can have 3 or 4 pieces, and that will still fit within my caloric requirements for the day. When you're not tracking, it becomes extremely difficult to know like, oh, can I have 1 piece of pizza or can I have 6 pieces of pizza? That might sound a little ridiculous, but it's true because you're in effect guessing at which kind of foods you eat. So when you restrict the different types of foods that you can eat, it makes it easier to guesstimate how much calories you're consuming, how much calories you have left, or how much calories you've gone over. So while I still suggest that you consider using some form of food tracking so that you can create sustainable habits, if you don't care to, it's a great idea to, limit the different types of foods that are allowable on your diet. And, even if you're doing that, you could still say like, oh, okay, so, regardless of my calories, I've now allowed myself to have 2 pieces of pizza per week. Something really simple like that is still a way that you're restricting the types of foods you can eat, but you're also restricting the amount, so you have a little bit better control. And lastly, just to kind of go along with that last point of limiting the food options, I suggest that you attempt to significantly increase the quality of your food. Focusing on things like lean proteins, green leafy vegetables that are high in fiber. The GI of carbohydrate in my mind doesn't really make much of a difference, but you can still manipulate that if you want. Stick with high GI carbs, before and after your training, and then during the rest of the day, stick with fairly low GI carbs. I personally don't think that it's as relevant as many other people think, but if that's something that's of concern to you, you can certainly manipulate those options based on those ideas. And then in addition to, increasing the quality of your food, you can consider things like carb cycling, measuring out your carbs and giving more on days where you have hard training sessions and less on days when you have lighter training sessions. There's a bunch of different options that you can do if you don't care to actually track your calories. So I hope this answers any question that you've had about whether or not tracking calories is necessary or even important. In my mind, it's a great technique to be able to precisely track how many calories you're consuming relative to your requirements. Plus, it also allows you to be able to, consume less healthy foods in moderation according to how many calories you have left or how many calories you don't have left. But again, you don't have to track. You can certainly just increase the quality of your food. You just have to recognize that regardless of if you're tracking calories or not, eventually you're going to have to manipulate your intake. And it's always best to have some sort of metric to build off of so that you know that you're actually moving in the right direction. So I think that about wraps it up for episode 5 today. If you like this content, please consider giving this video a like. And if you really like this content, please consider subscribing to the YouTube channel as well as the podcast. So that wraps it up for today, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Thanks.